All right, chapter 7-7, we are going to be tallying simple and compound interest. Simple interest, thankfully, is pretty simple. It's one equation, you get a straightforward answer, one step, and you're done. Okay, so that's kind of nice. Compound interest, it's a little bit more detailed, a lot more steps to it, but it's not harder. It just takes a little bit longer because you have to do it multiple times. Okay. So for those of you at home, you'll need to take notes on lined paper, and I want you to write down this equation that I'm about to show. For everybody in here, if you would just flip your paper over to the back, I want to talk about these equations. Okay, so the first one you see there says simple interest, right? So that's right here. So the first one we're going to talk about, and we'll do a couple of examples of, is simple interest. In simple interest, your equation is I equals PRT. Okay, I stands for interest. P stands for the principal. So it's either the amount you deposit into an account. Think of a savings account where you earn interest, or if you're going to get like a loan and they give you that principal amount and then you have to pay interest. So depending on whether or not it's a savings account or a loan, it's whether or not you're gaining interest or paying interest. But either way, it's calculated the same. And the principal is the initial amount either deposited or borrowed. Okay. The rate, and this is what's really important, the rate is always as a decimal. Now you're going to be given the rate as a percentage, and you're going to have to use what we learned in 7-1, 7-2 to turn those percentages into decimals, because you always have to plug it into the equation as a decimal. And then the other thing that's really important to notice here is that it's time in years. So if you're given the time in years, great, you just plug the number in. If you're given the time in months, you have to convert it to years, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so it's principal, which is your initial investment or borrowed amount, times the rate, which you have to turn into a decimal, times the time in years. Okay, so this is an example of what that looks like. You've got your principal amount, which is $1,000. You've got your rate, which you have to bounce. So it's 0.045 once you bounce. And then you've got your time, it's in years. So the two just go straight into the equation just like that. And then when you run that through your calculator, which in 8th grade, use your calculator. Okay, make life easier. You get I equals 90. Now you do not have to write out the simple interest is. Okay, I teach math, I don't teach English. We don't need a bunch of words here. You just would simply, as your answer, need to write that I equals $90. You do need the dollar sign. Okay, so that's what you would put as your answer to find the simple interest. Now, if the question asked at the end of 2 years, how much money would you have? What would you do? What would you add? You'd add the $1,000 you started out with, plus the 90 you earned in interest. So at the end of 2 years, you would have $1,090. Make sense? Or if it was a loan, how much did you pay back in 2 years? Well, you paid back the $1,000 plus you paid back the $90. So you paid back a total of $1,090. Okay. Simple interest is really pretty simple to tally. So we'll do a couple. Now flip over to the other side. We're going to do these. We're just going to do 2 examples here. We're not going to do number 7. All right. So for number 1, remember our equation is interest equals principal, good, times rate times time, right? That's our equation. So we're going to plug in what we know. We know that our principal amount is $1,300. So we're going to plug $1,300 in there. Times our rate. Now remember, our rate is 6%, but we have to bounce. So it's really 0.06 is what you're going to plug in for your rate. And then the time is already in years. Great. You just plug in the 7. And everybody should have a calculator in front of them. If you don't, grab one really quickly, because I want everybody to plug this into their calculator and make sure that everybody gets the same answer. 1,300 times 0.06 times 7. Colton, what'd you get? Plug it into your calculator. The principal times the rate times the years. Everything's multiplication, yes. Okay, and then how would I label this? 546 what? Yeah, everything here is going to be dollars. Notice it says when we get to this one, it didn't apply, but notice it says we're going to round to the nearest cent. So since this is money, we're going to round everything to the hundredth to make sure that it looks like dollars and cents. Okay. All right. So for number 4, we are going to do this one because notice our time. Okay. It's 36 months. Well, anytime you have something not given to you in years, put it over 12 and then reduce. Yes. You can, but here's where you can, but and you're going to plug it into the equation just like that. So if you're not sure how to convert it, just put it over a 12, right? Because it's not always going to be 36 months. What if it's 9 months? Okay, so then you would put 9 over 12. It's whatever it is in months, put it over 12, that converts it to years. So for this one, we have our interest equals, so I equals our principal, which is 1,900, times our rate, which notice we have to bounce, fill in the 0. So our rate is 0.055, and then times our months or our time in years. Well, 36 months is 3 years. So that's where you would plug in the 3, Eli. In the actual equation, you would plug in 3. Okay. And then Autumn, what do we get when we run that through the calculator? Okay. Oops, what'd you say? I'm just going to write it down from what you said. Okay, 313.5. Now I need to add a couple of things here to make this a good money answer. What do I need to add? Add a 0 at the end and a money sign. Because all of our answers are money, you need to make it make sense in terms of money. So notice on that first example, you don't have to add 0.00 to the end, right? But if it's 0.5, you do need to add the 0 to make it make sense in dollars and cents, okay? All right, so we're going to go ahead and skip number 7. We're going to go ahead and skip number 7, and we're going to jump to compound interest because I think number 7 is pretty straightforward. It's the principal. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to underline it. It's the principal. It's the rate, which you would bounce, and add the 0. And the time is already in years, so it's very, very straightforward, okay? So the only thing you need to remember as far as simple interest is bounce on your rate. And if it's, say it's 9 months, okay, you might have something that says 9 months. If so, just do what I said earlier, is just put it over 12 and then change that into a decimal, which is 0.75. And then you would plug 0.75 into the time spot because it's 0.75 of a year. All right, sound good? Okay, now go ahead and flip back over to the back side of your paper, and I want to talk a little bit about compound interest. Compound interest is more time consuming because you have to work it multiple times, and there's no, unless you have, you know, a computer that's programmed, which banks do, but we do not have a computer that's programmed to tally compound interest. The only way to do it is in multiple small steps. So a couple things to notice. One is our principal is still our principal on the first step. Our rate is still in terms of a decimal, but notice our time here. This says, what is the total amount of money in an account where $600 is invested at the rate of 8.75 compounded annually for 2 years? Okay, but notice what I put in my year spot. I put a 1, even though it's 2 years. You always put a 1 in the year spot because you have to tally it for year 1, then you have to tally it for year 2, and then you have to tally it for year 3 or however long it's compounded. And I will tell you on your homework, there was one that was compounded for 7 years. I wiped that one out. Okay, you guys don't have to do one that long. So I think the longest one you have is 4 years. But so for each time on your compound interest, your year is always going to be a 1. So you tally it for year 1. So when you tally it here, this is year number 1, right? You're tallying year number 1. In year number 1, you earn $52.50 in interest. You need to add that to the initial 600. So the total amount you earn in year one is $652.50. Then if you'll notice, you take year one's total, that becomes your new principal for year two. And so now you're doing year two here. Okay, you're still using a 1 in the year spot. And now your principal is your new amount from year one. That is your new principal. You still use the rate. You still use 1 as your year, and you get $57.09 earned in year two. Well, in order to find the amount of money in the account after 2 years, you have to take, the principal and the interest that you got right here. This was year one. You need to add it to the interest from year two to get a total of $709.59 at the end of year two. So compound interest, while it's not harder because you still use PRT, it's actually a little easier in the aspect of your year is always a 1. So you really don't even have to punch that into your calculator. But it is more difficult because for every year it compounds, you have to do a separate transaction, add up your principal, and that new principal becomes your principal for the following year. So we'll do a couple of examples of that, and then I'll set you loose on your homework. On your homework, I will tell you now, I've already blotted out the ones you don't have to do. So you'll notice your numbers jump around. It goes 1, 2, and then 7, 8. It's because I blocked out and make copies without them on there to give you room to work. So there's only 8 problems on your homework. Okay. All right. So let's work through a compound interest. All right. So we're going to start out, and I'm going to label this here just to kind of keep it straight. So we're going to start out with year one. Okay. Year one. In year one, my interest is, sorry, I meant to make that in black. My interest for year one, I'm going to tally it by using my principal, which is $450, times my rate. Now I have to bounce, 1, 2, add a 0. So 0.05 is my rate. And then what's my year going to be? Always a 1, right? Always a 1, because I'm just figuring year one. So when I run that through my calculator, I get, what do we get, Blake? Okay. 40, what do you get? 42 point, I'm getting something different. 450 times 0.05. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what I punched the first time. But all right, so for the first year, we earned $22.50 in interest. Now we need to take our principal, which was $450, plus our interest that we earned in year one, and we need a new principal amount. So we need to take those two numbers, add them together, and we get $472.50. Okay, that's how much money we have in the account at the end of year one. Now we're going to go to year two. And we're going to do our interest equals. Now for our principal amount, notice what we're going to use. We're going to use our new amount at the end of year one as our year two principal. So we start out with $472.50 times, the rest of it stays the same, times 0.05 times 1. And we do it again. Okay. So we take $472.50 times 0.05. And we get the interest for year two is 23. Now notice when you punch it in your calculator, you get 23.625. Make it money. So it's 23.63. Okay, you always round money to the hundredth. Okay, now we take the amount we started year two with, which was $472.50. We add the interest that we earned in year two, and we get 472.5 plus 23.63. And our new amount at the end of year two is $400 $96.13. All right, that's at the end of year 2. Notice we have to go to year 3. So we're going to come out here. We're going to do one more time, and we're going to do year 3. So we do our interest for year 3. Notice what our principal amount is, right? You take what you had at the end of year 2. That's your new principal amount. So my principal is 496.13 times my rate of 0.05 times my year, which is always going to be a 1. So you don't even have to put that in your calculator because anything times 1 is itself. Run that through our calculator. And we get that the interest earned in year 3 is $24.81. It's actually it's 0.8065, but you want to round to the penny. So it's 0.81. Now, remember it said how much is in your account at the end. So we're not quite done. We're almost done, but we have to take what we started year 3 with, which was 496.13. We need to add the interest that we earned in year 3. And that total amount is finally going to give us our total amount in the account after 3 years of earning compound interest. So our total amount here is 520.94. Make sure you put the dollar sign. I'm not real particular about the dollar signs all up in the problem, but in your final answer, make sure you put the dollar sign on your final answer. Okay? Are we good with that? Each time, just use the new principal amount. Do we need to do a second example, or you think you're good with one? Because it doesn't change. The only thing that changes with number 12, the example up there, is that you would do it one more time for year 4. Okay, so you do it the same way each time. So I don't think we need to do another example unless you guys want to. All right, so that is simple interest and then compound interest. And remember, in simple interest, make sure you pay attention if it's months or years. And in compound interest, you always use 1 year. Okay. All right. For those of you at home, let me know if you need anything. Shoot me an email. And if you get really stuck, I can open up a Google meeting later on this afternoon.